I'm Stephen K Amos, and welcome to a new episode of Me, I Blame the Parents. Join me as I talk to my contemporaries whose parents were born between 1928 and 1964, thus belonging to the silent generation. So called because they were raised during a period of war and economic depression. And the baby boomers, so called because after the depression, people were much happier, and quite frankly, they were at it like rabbits. Today's guest is an award-winning comedian and animator, whose creation, Little Howard, has featured on TV and radio. I asked him if his father was one for displaying affection.
His way of showing me he loves me is literally to invest in me, as if like I'm a startup.
And also about his mother's first aid skills.
For the rest of the day was walking about holding my arm, crying in my mum's petticoat tails, and she would just make a lot of fuss. He makes a lot of fuss, doesn't he? Doesn't he make a lot of fuss? And yeah, that was a radial fracture.
So please welcome Howard Reed. My parents fall in both camps. My mum is definitely a baby boomer, and my dad just in the cusp of the silent generation. What about your parents?
So mine are kind of the same. My mum was born after the war, totally baby boomer. My dad was literally born the day Hitler invaded Poland. So my granny, who lived to 102, who died about 10 years ago, she always used to say that she had this first baby and the rest of the world didn't give a crap about her being a mother for the first time because literally the world was falling apart around them. And that led to my dad's 60th birthday. So my dad's 83 now. In Kensington, there's a really lovely Polish restaurant called De Quaz, which I think is still there. And on his 60th birthday, we went to this restaurant with him and had a lovely meal. And we gave him a balloon with 60 on it. And when the waiter came over to take our orders, he said, "Do you know what today is?" And the man, who was sort of Eastern European extraction, said, "I don't know. It's the day that Hitler invaded Poland," with a great big grin. And a balloon saying 60. 60 years ago today, Hitler invaded Poland. And we just had to interject. And we're not celebrating that. We're celebrating his 60th birthday, just in case that they just thought, we've got a bloody Nazi in who's rubbing our faces in it. What are we going to do to his pierogies? Things like that are things that I find a great source of humour for Little Howard and other characters I do, that someone who's incredibly intelligent, my dad's a very intelligent man, but on certain social levels is a complete idiot, which I love, that combination of intelligence and stupidity, which I think sums me up totally in many ways.
I've got to say, you are very well known for creating a very successful animation by the Little Howard, which many people seems to think is actually based on you.
It's definitely based on me. It's based on me as a kid. I was dyslexic when I was growing up, and my childhood was full of amusing misunderstandings about what on earth people were talking about when they were speaking or writing, or basically I was constantly confusing everything about the world, and I thought that sort of confused innocence was a great way of looking at the world, because you can really show the idiocy of the way human beings interact by seeing it from a child's eye. But that's a great way of poking fun at quite complicated things in the adult world.
I'm assuming that at that stage you didn't know what the name of this condition was.
No, as I was diagnosed with dyslexia very late, I couldn't really read properly until the end of primary school. And my handwriting was always terrible and my spelling has always been terrible, which is tricky if you want to be a writer. And it was only very late. I must have been sort of 16 before anyone said, "Oh, by the way, this is what's different about your brain." And suddenly when they told me that, it was like, oh, it makes sense. Because before that, it was a total mystery. Yeah, that led to a lot of self-esteem issues because I was clearly cleverer than most of the kids in my class, but they could read and I couldn't, which was very much has formed how I think.
Did your parents recognise there may have been an issue?
They kind of knew there was an issue, but they'd never had anything like that. Because my older brother fell on his feet academically. My younger brother also. And I was this weird one in the middle that his brain didn't seem to work. And they were really supportive, and they tried to get me as much help as they could, but they didn't understand why I was different either. Less so than the educational people, because they probably knew what was going on, but they just couldn't say it because the education authorities just try and keep it quiet, because otherwise they might have to pay more money for your education. Yeah, so they were really supportive. I can't fault them for that at all. It was the world that wasn't quite catching up with it rather than them.
That's great to hear that you can't quite fault your parents, because I look back on my existence and also being a middle child with my twin sister, and I blame my parents for every damn thing. So
I can't fault them on that. I could definitely fault them on loads of other things.
where were your parents from?
So my mum moved all over the place, West Country and East Country. So the country. My dad was from South London originally, was born in Banstead. So she was a country girl and he was more of a city girl boy. So there's seven years between them, and the war between their births. So quite different generations.
Quite different, but I noticed you say that your dad was super intelligent, which I'm assuming means he had some sort of high-profile, intense job or career?
So he worked, bizarrely, he worked in the oil industry most of his life in a trade association. And then towards the end of his career, he worked for a trade association for deep sea diving contractors, which if you ever met the man, you wouldn't put him down as a deep sea diver. I'm not sure he ever donned an aqualung in his life, but yeah, so he was quite high end and quite a lot of money sloshing about in his industry.
Right. So a very wealthy man. And your mum?
And my mum was a stay-at-home mum and then was a pensions documentation specialist. So you can see the seeds of comedy just waiting to spring to life there with those two hilarious jobs.
Same with me, actually, because my mum was a nurse, fully qualified nurse, and my dad liked to call himself a contractor, which up until today, I've got no idea what that means.
Hired killer?
So I want to find out from you, what's your earliest memory of either of your parents?
My earliest memory is when my younger brother was born, and I remember having a photo taken. There's a photo of me with my older brother and my new baby brother, with my mum with a sort of a very 70s bob sitting on a very 70s sofa, and that's a picture I've got in my head, and that's as far back as I remember, I think.
Okay, that's quite sweet.
But it's mainly my mum there, but I can't remember if my dad was there. He may have been taking the photo, but I don't know. But
My mum used to always wear those scarves that they put around. I seem to remember Margaret Thatcher having one of those scarves that women used to wear all around their heads and tie under their chins.
Brilliant.
As though their hair was going to fly off. I have no idea why they wore those. So you're the middle child. Do you reckon that because I feel it, that my parents treated us all very differently, because they were quite young when they had my elder siblings.
Yeah.
So did you have that kind of feeling that you were treated differently?
it definitely makes a difference how you're treated. My older brother was a very sensible one and could be trusted with things. I was this little weirdo and couldn't do the stuff that children should be able to do. And then my younger brother was just like a spherical explosion of blonde sort of cherub, and so he was super cute, and being 3 years younger, get away with anything, and he was cute and he knew it, and he used it like a bomb.
Is there an episode you can give us an example where you were incensed that your younger sibling got away with something that you couldn't?
If me or my elder brother did hurt each other, all hell would break loose. My mum would go nuts, my dad would go even more nuts if he was there, and my younger brother said this thing, I think he just punched me or something like that, or done something incredibly violent, and he just said in the cutest voice, my mum said, "Why did you do that, Alex?" And he just said, "I just felt like it." And everyone laughed. He just punched me, bear in mind. So I didn't bloody laugh. And everyone, "Oh, you're so funny. Oh, isn't he sweet?" And it's like, he's just punched me. Which I would never have got away with that at all. It was almost like the cartoon Tweety Pie.
Yes.
Incredibly violent, super cute. This little baby chick who basically violently assaults Sylvester the cat all the time. It felt like I was living in an episode of that. I just felt like it. Did you?
And they got away with murder. And I noticed, though, you'd have kept saying, if my dad was there. Was he not really around because of work?
He was one of those dads that existed behind a newspaper at breakfast and disappeared and then came back and was very tired from work. And he had a temper on him, which I think a lot of dads of that generation do.
I think maybe it's because they really had no option in terms of childcare, and they had to work. They were absolutely seen as the head of the household, bring the money in. My parents had 3 kids, under the age of 5 by the time my dad was 25.
Wow.
I can't even imagine that now.
My dad must have been 30-odd when I was born, but my mum was probably 23. So they must have had my brother when my mum was about 20. So I've got kids now, but we had them when me and my wife were both 30-ish. And I just can't imagine remembering me at 20. It's like, oh, you don't want to put a child anywhere near that. And the idea that they could look after us and form our young minds is mildly terrifying and possibly explains a lot.
It does explain a lot. So I want to ask, because you're a dad yourself now, do you see any similarities between yourself and the way you interact with your kids compared to your parents?
I do. I think it's a combination of doing what my mum and dad did. Like, I'm very similar on certain things, but quite different on other things. Like, my dad, both of them, in fact, were very British, very reserved, not very emotionally effusive about anything. And I think loads of people in my generation have that. And it's definitely had an effect on us in that we are generally much more, we will openly say I love you and things like that to our kids and are much more cuddly. And parenting styles has changed a lot. And I think that's definitely a reaction against how I was brought up. But also, I'm probably more authoritarian between me and my wife. We sort of have slipped into traditional gender roles a bit, but partly because I've ended up with a career that is more defined than my wife, and when my kids were born happened to have a couple of gigs that paid well enough that my wife could stop working. But actually I was an animator making a cartoon series, so I was in the spare room. So if the nappies needed changing, I didn't have to come back from London. I just came through from the other room.
So you made a conscious decision to be more of a present father. But you said that they were quite British, stiff upper lip, that kind of thing. What about talking and communicating, the whole notion of carnal knowledge, the talk? Did that ever happen between the boys and the parents?
It did not, under any circumstances, no way. I think partly because my parents have a very religious background, and so any idea of anyone doing anything sexual was frowned upon. If anything sexual came on the television, my dad would turn it, well, that's a load of rubbish. So that nothing ever sort of prompted any conversations like that. I remember my dad teaching me how to shave. It was way before I had to shave, because I was a very late developer. I sort of didn't really start shaving until I was about 20. But about 10, he took me in the bathroom and showed me how to shave. And that was as close as it got, really, to either talking about your body developing or sex or relationships or anything like that. That wasn't on the table.
I don't mean to laugh, but it just gives me a wonderful image of your dad saying to you, all right, son, now the big talk. Come to the bathroom. And you're thinking, what's happening? And he hands you a shaver. Gets the cream out. Oh, okay.
All you need to know, as long as you scrape things off your face.
Because, they do say also that memory fades with time. Because I remember talking to my mum about certain things that they've completely forgotten or have a completely different recollection of. I remember my first ever Saturday job was at Sainsbury's supermarket. And every 2 weeks, I get a little brown envelope with my wages in it and a wage slip. And I'd come home and I'd hand it to my mum. She'd take what she wanted and give me the rest. When I mentioned to her recently, she was like, I wouldn't have done such a thing to you. So do you have a memory of a situation that your parents completely have a different recollection of?
Yes. I broke my arm when I was about 5. I say I broke my arm. It wasn't me. We had a patio at the back of the house with a set of concrete steps. And my brother was 3.5 years older than me, so he must have been 8 or so, and I was 5. He dared me to jump down this set of concrete steps, which he could do easily because he was a good foot taller than me. He leapt down, rolled on the grass like Lee Majors, and ran off and said, come on, Howard, you do it. And I did it, and I fell on my face and smacked my arm. And literally for the rest of the day was walking about holding my arm in sort of a sling position, crying in my mum's petticoat tails, and she would just make a lot of fuss. He makes a lot of fuss, doesn't he? Doesn't he make a lot of fuss? And yeah, that was a radial fracture, and she doesn't remember it like that at all. She remembers rushing me to the hospital, and yeah, I remember it being most of the day before anyone. He's still going on about that arm, isn't he? He just wants attention, doesn't he? He always wants attention. No, radial fracture, mum. That is told very differently by my mum.
If you have these conversations where you remember things and they have different recollections, do you argue about them or laugh about them?
My family doesn't I realised my family doesn't sit around and reminisce much when I met my wife's family, who are constantly telling stories about their childhood, remembering there's these anecdotes and stories that come up all the time. And my family generally don't do that at all. I think possibly that came from their parents were very much, would literally tell war stories. Like my gran on my mum's side would tell stories about being bombed in the Second World War, to the extent that the next generation were bored to tears of telling stories, so no one talked about their past at all. On the other side, my gran on my dad's side remembered being bombed by Zeppelins in the First War. She lived in Russell Square, and she remembers Zeppelins coming over and dropping bombs. Before bombing was invented, my gran was bombed. But she was so traumatised by that she never talked about it. So I think my dad caught not talking about your past from a mother who was traumatised and therefore didn't talk about the past. And my mum caught not talking about the past because they had a parent that wouldn't shut up about the past. So, yeah, it's weird how, the Philip Larkin, they fuck you up, your mum and dad. It's very much so trying to do something or trying not to do something will inevitably mess up the next generation. I think I'll just be messing my kids up in just a different, new way than my parents messed me up.
Do you think that stemmed into talking about feelings then as well? You did mention your parents not saying that they loved you, or did I get that right?
Yes. Has never happened as far as I remember. The L word has never been, like the S word, the sex doesn't get talked about, the love doesn't get talked about. I totally know that they do, but it's not in my dad's vocabulary to do it. My dad will show me he loves me by loaning me some money when I need some money. I had an opportunity to do some work in America, in the States, and my dad, he will help me do stuff, but he will do it in a way that I don't know why he does this. So he paid for my flight to LA to have these meetings and said, if nothing comes of it, you can keep that money. You don't ever have to pay me back. But if you get a big contract out of it, I want... And I think he gave a percentage on how much he wanted back. So he interacts with the world in a sort of like an economist. His way of showing me he loves me is literally to invest in me, as if like I'm a startup.
You mentioned there about how your dad showed his appreciation of you in terms of investing in you like a startup. When you started doing comedy and stand-up and then getting success, how did your dad deal with that?
He was very, you've got to get a proper job, you need to have something to fall back on. And I got a degree and stuff like that in English and history, so I could fall back on teaching English and history. But I think my whole career choice was, I saw my dad, what he did, how hard he worked, and how, I think, unhappy it made him. And I just wanted to do something that was fun and that didn't feel like work. And I definitely think that's in reaction to growing up with my dad, who had a proper job. And they were sort of surprisingly supportive. I think when I was at uni and I started saying, well, I'm going to try doing stand-up. And because I worked out how my dad worked, I pitched an economic argument as to why stand-up was fairly economically resilient thing to be in, which for the last 20 years, give or take the last year, I was right. Because basically, in times of economic crisis, comedy clubs usually do all right, because when people are miserable, they need cheering up. And I pitched this argument to him, saying, I'm trying to make out, I've thought this through, rather than I just want to do this because it means I work in pubs. That's an amazing thing to do. You can work, as a 20-year-old person, you work in a pub near alcohol and women. And that was what I was thinking, but I framed it in a way that would make economic sense to my dad.
I told my dad for many, many years that I was a minicab driver.
Genuinely didn't tell him that you were doing it at all?
Yeah. I used to tell him I was going out in the evening, working, driving taxis.
I think if it hadn't worked out, they would have very much been leaning hard on that. And I think they probably thought, well, let's let him get out of his system. He'll come crawling back. I basically gave myself 2 years. If I'm not earning a living doing this in 2 years, then I'm going to knock it on the head. Because you and I have been through the open spot circuit in London, and there's a lot of people who had been there for a very long time. And there's a fine line between long-term open spot and serious mental illness. And you've got to know when to pull the chute. And when I've been able to treat them to something, it's usually been like So when I did the Royal Variety, which I did the same year as you did, they were my guests to come see me at the Royal Variety, because when I was started off at stand-up, as a stand-up, because they're quite religious people, as a stand-up, I was an adult stand-up, and I would talk about stuff that they didn't want to hear coming from their son's mouth. My sort of breakout stand-up song that I wrote, I do songs and stuff, was a song called Wank Me Off, Mrs. Grimshaw, basically about elective child abuse, which I tried to broadcast on Radio 4 once, until the lawyers looked at it and go, yeah, no, which was very dark, but it killed in clubs, but to a totally different generation to my parents.
To be honest, I think it's funny you mentioned that the Royal Variety that we both did. In fact, on my parents' mantelpiece is a picture of me, and the Queen is in front of us. That picture is on my parents' mantelpiece, and that is the time in their eyes that I'd made it.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it was, interestingly, in the photo, because basically when you do the line-up with the Queen, they take a photo of you, and I blinked during my photo, and I was of so little importance on that bill that that was the one they gave me. Yeah, I've got my eyes shut when I'm meeting the Queen. You didn't take more than one photo? No. Michael Ball was sitting next to you in full drag. I saved the roll of film for that, mate. But so when I did that, they got my tickets. And when I got nominated for the Perrier Award, you then do a show in the West End. You do one show. It was me and Reg D. Hunter doing a double bill. So I was going, you might not be into what Reg is doing. So it's me and my cute cartoon boy doing an hour of interactive animated whimsy. And then Reg with his hard-hitting political stuff. Like, good Lord. But they came to that, and Brendan Burns was there. And anyone who's not familiar with Brendan Burns, it was sort of a firebrand Aussie comic. And he cornered my mum and dad backstage at Her Majesty's Theatre. And he wouldn't leave them alone until they told them that they were proud of me. Are you proud of him? Are you proud of him? Well, I suppose. Yeah, of course we're proud. Come on, tell him you're proud of him. Tell him you're proud of him. Forcing my parents to emotionally engage with me. It was the only one who's ever managed it.
Thinking back, my parents, they're quite cool people, but I don't swear in front of my parents at all. None of us do. My dad does it now for comedic effect, right? He didn't drop the C-bomb twice.
Brilliant.
Because you know it will make us laugh. Yeah, and we just go, what? How you've just said that?
What I find fascinating is the infantilization of your parents, in that my generation, and my wife is very, very similar, we don't swear in front of our parents, and we don't talk about sex in front of our parents, almost as if they're kids, because that conversation's never been had, and so we're kind of stuck in that parent-child relationship. Whereas my kids are now turning into their teens, and we try and have conversations about sex and things like that, and we swear in front of, especially after lockdown, all bets were off. It's like there's no getting away from the fact that mum and dad swear if you're stuck in a house with them for a year. And so I've always tried to interact with my kids on an equal level as we're human beings. I happen to be the one that's in charge, but I mess things up, you mess things up. Whereas in the 70s, parenting was very much a totalitarian state. We were the subjects and they were the rulers.
You also mentioned, Howard, that your parents are quite religious. In terms of the way the modern world is coming, what with the LGBTQ, the trans community, has their religion affected their outlook on general stuff, or have they mellowed with age?
They've surprised me at every turn. I always thought that it would be a big problem. So I reckon if there's a such thing as a stand-up gene, I got it from my mum's family, because my mum's family were preachers. They were called Venn. The surname was Venn. And there's quite famous Presbyterian preachers that travelled up and down the east coast of the country preaching to trawlermen and things like that. So if they were born 100 years earlier, they would have fled the country because they would be Puritans. And my grandparents were very puritanical, and my mum is a product of that. And so I always thought that when me and my girlfriend lived together before we got married, we had our son before we got married. And I thought that would be a proper deal breaker. And it was a deal breaker with my grandparents and my mum's family. But my mum defended us against them. And at every turn, I've always gone, oh, is this going to... So I've got lots of gay friends. And my best man at my wedding is gay. And they've totally welcomed him with open arms. Despite when I was a kid, I didn't have a girlfriend for a long time, and I finally had a girlfriend. They went, oh, thank goodness, we thought you were gay. Which all parents did at that stage, because they have that in their mind, because they've been brought up in a homophobic world. But every single time I've done something that I knew was going to challenge them, they've always sort of had my corner, which has always been lovely, and always a total surprise. My mum certainly does. My dad just doesn't talk, so we don't know.
It does suggest that they have kind of moved with the times. So it brings me on to technology, because my dad still cannot work a voicemail on a mobile phone.
My dad has only just recently got a smartphone. He doesn't use it. Well, he doesn't use it in the way that you think a smartphone should be used. Now, if I text my dad, for a long time I thought my dad had got his head around texting. But what happens is I text my dad and my dad hands it to my mum and my mum replies as him and hands it back. So it doesn't read it, just doesn't interact with that at all. They keep up with broadband and stuff like that. They've got a smart telly. I have to go around and make sure it's working. When they've got a problem, they don't understand how it works, but they want to embrace it, and they do lots of stuff online. That all their courses and stuff during lockdown went onto Zoom. Yeah, they've definitely kept up with it, but they don't necessarily know how it works or why it works or how to fix it. That's what I'm there for, it seems.
Do you know, I think it's really funny because my dad seems to have put all of myself and my siblings in different compartments in terms of what we can do for him. I'm the one that does the phone. My brother is the one that goes and sorts out the Sky Dish, because before my brother went, like 3 or 4 years ago, to sort out the Sky Dish, my dad used to try and get a ladder and fix and adjust the aerial. Like, the aerial?
Oh.
What do you do? No. All I can think of is Rod Hull. I know, you can't do that, Dad.
I like to think that he was up there with Emu, and possibly Emu pushed him.
Your parents have a particular view in terms of like going to the doctor, mortality?
Yeah, because my dad was a chemist by training, and so he's very scientific and has an ongoing thing. He's a scientist in a household full of people with arts backgrounds. Like, I'm a stand-up, my brother's an architect. My younger brother wanted to be a lawyer but ended up being an engineer, but partly because he was spoiled rotten. Don't tell him I said that. But he did badly in his exams, but actually was really smart and ended up being tricked into being an engineer because my dad, he found a weak one that he could pounce on and force them into a science-based degree. So he really prizes science. But my mum will every so often go for a more holistic. He's had back trouble, so she'd go to a chiropractor, which would drive my dad insane because that's not scientific and that's not how. Is it chiropractor or something? What I want to say, chiropodist. I get the two confused. One of them's your spine.
Chiropodist is
and
your foot.
chiropodist is your foot.
Yeah.
So my mum will sort of go into those more alternative ways, which I'm sure will lead to a lot of mumbling under his breath from my dad.
My dad, for example, he can't throw anything away. Are your parents like that?
My mum, in particular, is so totally unsentimental about things. My mum and dad have a nice house with a very large loft and a garage, and they've got plenty of room to store memorabilia. Say, like, the books from my school where I wrote my first stories, they've got loads of room to store that. But for about 15 years, my mum would turn up with a shoebox full of some of my stuff that she's found, like certificates and things I've achieved, that she doesn't want anything to do with. Get it out of my loft. It's a folder in the corner of your loft. Yeah, get rid of it. It's interfering with our insulation. It's flattening the foam.
Thinking back, my mum and dad used to have catchphrases. And one of my dad's most recent one is, if you do something good for him, or if someone does something good that he approves of, he will just go, yes, you are not a bastard.
That's brilliant.
I know.
I mean, talk about fake praise. Like,
I know, right?
That is the
backhanded or
pinnacle of understatement. You've got he's got a list of bastards. You're wavering between the two columns, and there's a not a bastard column, and today Stephen is in the not a bastard column, but most of the rest of the time you're straying over that line, mate, and you you need to think about what you're doing. If he was angry about something, my dad would say, blood and sand. It's a deeply horrible image. Like, I don't know where that comes from. Blood and sand, like sand mixed with blood. Like, that's an image you want to pop into my head when you stub your toe. That in my head was a catchphrase of his. And my mum has an amazing, and still does, has an amazing turn of phrase. She will paint a picture with words that will haunt you forever. So when I came home later than expected, she said a phrase that, I don't know why it stuck in my head. She said, I expected to find you rotting in a ditch, she said. And I had nightmares about images of of my body rotting. I could see my skeleton rotting in a ditch, and I was going, oh my God, I'm going to rot in a ditch. And so recently, my mum has always hated dogs. And she's repeated this to my niece, who developed a phobia of dogs off the back of this. Said, the thing is about dogs is people with dogs, just sometimes they wake up and the dogs rip their throat out in their sleep. And she never explicitly told us that she had a phobia of dogs. She was scared of dogs. But she just acted like she had inside knowledge that dogs are evil and they will destroy you and kill you and tear your throat out. And she will happily tell a toddler that a dog will tear their throat out.
Do you think you're turning into your parent?
I think I've modelled my entire life on trying not to turn into my dad. But I definitely have the sort of muttering senior moments that my dad has. And I definitely got his temper, and despite the fact he had a very, on the surface, non-creative, non-imaginative job, he definitely lived in his imagination in that he would you could see him replaying arguments and dwelling on things, and I definitely do that. I've definitely done the forcing my kids to sit down with a plate of food. I mean, to be fair to me, much better food than my dad would force me to eat, because I grew up in the 1970s where food was hardly gourmet in this country. No fault of theirs. It's been sort of one of my formative things is trying not to turn into my dad, but it's inevitable, isn't it? I'm basically just my dad with slightly more spiky hair and who writes cartoons rather than talks to deep-sea diving contractors.
You know, it'd be wonderful to talk to your kids and find out their point of view, actually. As I come to the end, I'm looking for anecdotes about something that your parents did or said. I can think of one from my childhood that stuck in my mind forever when there's me, my twin sister, my older brother, and we were getting a train. My first memory was getting a train, and my dad had suitcases all under his arms. And he had the train tickets in his mouth. And as we got to the train, there was a guard at the door, and the guard said, "Show me your tickets." And my dad sort of motioned his head and mouth forward, and the guy turned his nose up and went, "I can't see the tickets." My dad put the cases down, and they were whistling that the train was going to go in like 30 seconds. And he took the tickets out of his hand, and he looked the guy straight in the eye and said, "Listen, if I miss this train, I'm going to beat you." That's just... I was just mortified.
From more recently, so my mum and dad have both had heart things going on in later life, and my mum had an operation on her heart. So when she was convalescing, the doctor said she wasn't allowed to pick up anything heavier than a kettle. And so my dad, okay, right, yes, of course, obviously we've got to find a solution to that. And so my dad turned up, bearing in mind my mum's recovering from heart surgery, turned up with, I think it was the Argos catalogue, and he'd circled all of the hoovers that were lighter than kettles, because he's of the generation that it wouldn't occur to him to do the hoovering himself. Yeah, technology has moved on such that you don't have to stop doing the hoovering just because you've had a major operation on your heart. Here, look, you can carry on your beloved hoovering. And he went away with I wouldn't have liked to have been in the next ward or the next bed once that Argos catalogue went down. There was some stern words were said.
That is brilliant. That's such a funny story. Oh my goodness. Thank you very much, Howard, and obviously little Howard, when we see his return.
Thanks so much for having us, Stephen. It's been lovely. We're looking down memory lane and upsetting my parents.
So that was Howard Reed, who informed us that a significant birth date can cause an international incident. Plus, if you've got a one-time chance to be photographed with the Queen, you'd better keep your eyes open. And if you come from a family of preachers, you too can become a stand-up comedian. Join me next time for more Me, I Blame the Parents. Just a little delving into what makes some parents tick. And we've got to know them a little bit better. So, that's old, folks. You've been listening to Me, I Blame the Parents, hosted by me, Stephen K Amos, with special guest Howard Reed, produced by Hugh Sington.